Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for being here today. My name is Mike Harsey. I'm St. Louis Park Chief of Police. Thank you for taking your time out of your busy days and schedule to be here today to learn more about human trafficking and how you can be aware of what to look for in your rental properties and how you can work with us, the police department, to try and combat this terrible terrible thing that's going on in human trafficking.
I know a number of agencies have open investigations for sex trafficking in rental properties, and St. Louis Park is one of those agencies. So know it happens, know there's a very good likelihood that it is going on either in your property or possibly a property next to you, and so we want to educate you guys to be our eyes and ears and let us know when there's something that maybe just doesn't seem right. And then you call us and then we'll figure it out from there. Does that make sense? I want to introduce our speaker tonight, Lorena Pinto. She's with the Family Partnerships Pride program, as well as Maggie. Maggie is from Cornerstone. Lorena's been in this, working in this field for over 10 years now, and I've had the pleasure to work with her in training different hotels of ours in St. Louis Park. She's a fantastic speaker. We did this once before, and the people that came really enjoyed her and thought she was a good presenter. So you will get a lot out of this. If you have questions, again, please make sure you raise your hand. And Lorena, take it away.
Thank you. So thank you all for coming. I've been vetted, so hopefully you all enjoy my presentation as well. Earlier I put this up here and I wanted to make sure that each one of you had the opportunity to get 3 Post-it notes and a pen. So anybody did not get that? We're good? Okay. And then I asked you to go ahead and put it in the prospective areas where it either said prostitute or sexually exploited persons. And so hopefully we all did that. And so I'm going to have Maggie, who is my co-presenter, and she's going to go ahead and help me in just a second check out those Post-it notes. So a little bit about me, and Alex kind of covered some of these things. So I have been doing this work for a really long time, specifically in the nonprofit sector, working with sexually exploited youth. It started out about 6 years ago, and then now I work with the Family Partnership where we serve both youth and women. So we serve across the lifespan. I have had international and domestic experience, and my international experience is really what brought me back to the States to continue to do that work here. Actually, not here in Minnesota, but I started in California, where I'm originally from, San Diego County. So I did that work there, and my work brought me here. I knew that Minnesota was actually passing some safe harbor laws and that they were the model state. And I wanted to make sure that to get into the action and continue to do what I was doing in a larger scale. So that's why I came to Minneapolis. And I'll show you a map later on that kind of shows you where Minneapolis is at within the entire country for sexually exploited persons, youth particularly. So then I am a trainer, so I've trained over about 1,500 people throughout the time that I've been doing this work. And it's just something like this, usually hotels, law enforcement, teachers, anyone that you can think of that might encounter a sexually exploited person. So that may be in the hospitals, that's gonna, like I said, be law enforcement, teachers, counselors, gonna be social workers, anything that you can think about, any system that they might have to get through to get to receive services. And just as a point, I'm actually a graduate student, and what I really want to do is obviously keep presenting, but I am studying to be a therapist. I'm working specifically with this population, so I'm very intrigued and knowledgeable in the effects of trauma with this particular population. I've done most of my work with women and youth, so sometimes you'll hear me say a lot of she and hers, and for that I apologize, because now we know and we have the knowledge and information that this is happening across all genders. And so sometimes you'll hear me say something like that, and I'll go over some of the other terms that I use to kind of educate you and be like, wait, what'd she say? What does that mean? So, and if that's the case, we have a mic, ask questions. I really love interactive trainings and presentations. So if you have anything that particularly like, oh man, I heard something about that, or I actually wanted to ask you, you can ask me at lunch or dinner, or you can ask me throughout the presentation. If it's something that's a little more sensitive, please feel free to just pull me away, and I will love to be able to give you the resources or information that you need. So that's a little bit about me, and we'll talk a little bit about, our activity. So Ms. Maggie, there you are, great. And you have a mic? Wonderful.
Hi.
Hi. So Maggie works for Cornerstone, like Alex had said, and she does mainly works with advocacy and case management and kind of community liaison. She'll tell you a little bit about her role. The reason that Maggie is here is because this is a collaborative work. So yes, the family partnership has been around for a really long time. Yes, I work for the family partnership, but I think all service providers, the community as a whole realizes that this is something that has to be done large scale. So law enforcement has to play a role. Judicial system has to play a role. Criminal justice for juveniles has to play a role. Shelters have to play a role. Therapy has to, like, everything that you can think of, we're all involved in this, because unless we work on it comprehensively, we are not going to tackle the real issue, which we'll talk later on. It's more of a system-based issue. So one of the reasons why I do this, why I like to actually bring in this activity is because I want to start talking about language. And I feel like language is very important to kind of set the tone for the presentation. And with that said, I asked all of you to write words that you could think of when you hear the word prostitute, right? I used to do this, and this is just transparency, I used to do this out loud. And I didn't really get much responses, so you can just imagine why. They're like, I'm not saying anything. Even though it's a very non-judgmental space. And so I thought, okay, how do I set this up so people can actually express themselves? And it's okay to have these biases. I have these biases. Maggie has these biases. And we have to challenge them all the time because we are working with this particular population that needs our help. But it is very normal. We are all living in the same society. We're all kind of raised watching the same movies, listening to the same news stories. And so it's natural that we have these thoughts, right? So there is no shame in anything that you've written. Hopefully nobody put their name on there because I will read it. No, I'm just kidding. I will not read it. Okay, so Maggie, will you read some off for me? What does this group think about when they hear the word prostitute?
Harassed,
Okay.
chemically dependent, illegal, pimp, uneducated. Did I say abused already? I've seen that a couple times.
Okay.
Choice and willing. Let's see over here. I have whore a couple times, scum, felony,
Was that scum?
scum.
Scum. Got it.
Money, late nights, men, hooker a couple times, lady of the night, harlot.
Harlot. That's an
Okay.
old one. Okay, thank you. So that's okay, right? I expected, I've heard worse. I've trained law enforcement sometimes, and sorry about police officers, but I'm like, whoa, okay. But this is what we think about, and these terms, while we may think that they're sometimes hard to hear, it is what is being talked about, right? This is how this particular population has been portrayed. So let's go ahead and move over to the next one. I want you to tell me what this group thinks of and what comes to mind when they hear the word sexually exploited persons.
I already saw my favorite. Taken?
Taken.
The movie, Taken?
Yes, that's a good one.
Okay. I have children, slaves, victim, lonely, sad, lost souls, victim again, homeless, rape, vulnerable adults, vulnerable minors, vulnerable a lot here, young females, children from another country.
That covers it. Great. So this is going to be a very obvious question. What is the difference between those two lists as far as the things that were written? So Maggie has this is an actual question. So Maggie has the microphone. So who can tell me what is the big difference for these? Oh. Yes, yes. Sorry, no, you're fine. You don't have to apologize. There's no apologizing here, okay? And you want to use the mic?
I was just going to say empathy.
Empathy, okay. And then you said something, I really want to capture that.
I just said more empathy towards the sexually,
Exploited
people, yeah.
Perfect, right. So there's more empathy in what we're talking about, right? There's more compassion in our voices and things that we've written. So very unlike when we think of prostitute and we think of willing, whore, what were the other ones? Remind me.
Talked about pimps, drugs,
Pimps,
abused.
drugs, and things like that. But a very willing type of mentality, right? And that's normal because when we think about someone that is out in the streets taking money, you think, well, they're out there, they're not necessarily like handcuffed. You know, I don't see anybody standing beside them being like, go now, or pushing them into vehicles. You don't see that. And because we don't see that, we tend to have this particular idea of what is going on because so much of it is behind the surface, right? And so let me ask you another question. Between those two lists, who is to blame for the circumstances? The prostitute, and you don't have to, someone has an answer, or the sexually exploited persons? So who says prostitute is to blame for the particular circumstances? Nobody says that prostitutes are to blame. This is why I never do this like alcohol thing, because people are like, I'm not saying it. What takes one person, a brave person, to raise their hand? And so do we think that sexually exploited, thank you. Yeah, all right, because that is, yeah, that's good. Thank you so much for volunteering. Again, don't be sorry. There is no shaming in this presentation. You'll hear a lot of words that maybe you've never heard before. Because I work with this population doesn't mean that I'm here to be like, you need to do this. I love the fact that this is an opportunity to educate. And oh, she raised her hand and said, who is to blame for the circumstances, the sexually exploited person or the prostitute? And she said the prostitute is to blame. Whereas the sexually exploited person is forced, right? So when we think of sexually exploited people or person, youth, child, whatever it is, we're thinking of a third person potentially. Maybe a pimp, maybe an abductor, right? Maybe in Taken, someone that just like snatches you up and throws you in a dungeon somewhere in wherever she was, somewhere international country, never to be found again. Someone that doesn't have the power or the willingness to leave. Someone who is physically forced, sexually forced, psychologically forced, chemically forced because they're chemically dependent. So those are the things that we see when we think about, or imagine when we think about sexually exploited person. So let me paint another picture for you. While these two pieces of paper are very separated by that storage door right there, I want you to imagine this being a timeline. Okay, so I want you to imagine it starting with sexually exploited persons here. And that person maybe is, and nobody put age, which was funny, but I was feeling if it was like kid or youth. So a lot of times I'll get like, 12 to 13, 15, 16, maybe 17, but typically under that adult line, right? Someone that has to be forced typically doesn't have a lot of control over their situation, and so they're usually children. So here's a sexually exploited person at 12 years old. Someone who is forced, someone who is maybe even kidnapped, because that does happen, and I've met a lot of victims who have told me that, and is put in a situation where he or she does not have control over what is happening to them. And yet, they're being forced, maybe coerced with love and promises and money and shelter and drugs. And this young person goes from being 12 to 14 to 16 to 18 to 20, still doing this, right? Still living this lifestyle, not knowing exactly how to get out and not knowing what resources are there for them to actually do that. And so now they're 18 and then they're 22 and they're still doing this. And maybe they got away from the pimp for a little bit and they kind of started doing their own thing, maybe got a job, but then couldn't pay rent. And like, shoot, what am I gonna do now? Oh, well, you know what I do know how to do. I need to pay that rent because I am not gonna be homeless. So then they're 22, 24, 26, 28, 30, 32. I've worked with 50-year-old women. I just actually spent some time with a 50-year-old woman yesterday who had been brought into the life of sexual exploitation at the age of 13. And she's 54 now. So what I'm trying to paint for you is a timeline. So why is it that when they're 12, they're victims, but all of a sudden when they're 30 or 40 or 28, they're criminals? And then they're prostitutes and whores and things like that. What happened to that person in that timeline for them to be unable to leave that life? Right? Was anybody there saying, hey, you're better than this, hey, you shouldn't be doing this? Was mom or dad or brother or anybody? All of the things that could happen to a person, all of the horrible things that could happen to a person in those years, I guarantee you did happen to them. So by the time they reach their 50s, 54 years old, like the woman I met last night, there is zero compassion and self-love. There is zero hope in her life that she can or maybe will make other choices. There's chemical dependency. There's knowing that they don't have any skills and haven't taken the time to build that skill set in that. So all they really know how to do is have sex for money. And that is how they support themselves. And that is their quote-unquote job. So I like to throw it out there, and I really like this activity because I love, if anything, if you're gonna learn anything today, and I hope it's definitely more than this, but if you're gonna learn anything today, let's talk about the P word, right? And I say that, it's like very childlike, but the P word, the prostitute word, and what it does when you think about it. So if you encounter someone on the street and you see that it's kind of sketchy situation and you seem like they're dressed a certain way, they're acting a certain way, maybe they're high looking or maybe just causing ruckus in your apartment complex, and you'd be like, that's a prostitute. How do you think you're going to treat her by calling her that? Do you think you'll treat her differently if you called her or identified her as a sexually exploited person? You might. I know I did, right? You might. Because what happens is that if you think that she's a prostitute, and if you believe she's a prostitute, and you believe she's a whore, you believe she is an addict, you believe that she is, and all these other words I honestly don't remember, sorry Maggie. But if we change our mind frame and adopt a different language, and start with that, we might actually start interacting with that group of people differently. Because we might start seeing it with a little bit more compassion, right? So that is how I want to start. It's just the idea of language. You'll hear me here, you'll see me and hear me say prostitution, because the prostitution is a legal term. Because when they are booked and taken to jail, they're booked for prostitution. So you have to, that's a word that's, I don't know if it'll ever leave us, right? But we have to think about how we're using it. Is it a legal term, a technical term? Yes, it is. I will use words like survivor. I'll use words like victim. I'll use words like sexually exploited person, sexually exploited youth. I'll use words like CSEC, which is an acronym, commercial sexual exploitation of children, children including up to 24. So I'll use words like that. I'll use words like the life, and that is basically determining like the lifestyle, the life of someone who is being sexually exploited. Because that life comes with all these different things. So all these other things and systems are in place for that person to stay in this life. So I'll use words like that. I'll use words like pimps. I'll use words like John, but I actually don't like using John because I know a John and he's really nice. And I don't like tainting him with that. So I like using sex buyer. Call it like it is. Right? The person is buying sex, he's a sex buyer. He's abusing children, he's a child abuser. That's what he or she is. So those are words that you hear me say. And some of these words might be triggering for some of you. And it might be, it will be heavy to hear about it for the next 3.5 hours. I'll keep it light, obviously tell little jokes here and there. But if it is hard, and if it's something that you feel like, I can't, this is just too much, you are more than welcome, and I encourage you to take that time and step out. Go outside, get some air, go out here. I think there's like some sort of basketball game going on. So, and then just take care of yourself, right? I know I'm gonna take care of myself when I get home tonight. So I encourage you to do the same. So, where do I come from? Why am I here? So Pride is a program through the Family Partnership. The Family Partnership has been around since 1878. Crazy. So we're actually an organization that helped fund United Way, to fund the humane movement that advocated for children's rights. And then Pride was established in 1978, so about 39, maybe 40 years ago now. And it was started by a survivor, and it sees as prostitution because that is the term that was used then, and her therapist. So it was started like a support group. Women would come in and kind of just talk about their experiences, get support, this is what's going on with me, and then it grew to actually becoming a program where we provided services like case management, advocacy, criminal justice advocacy. We still continue to do groups, we do trainings, and we actually have a housing program as well. So this is what it stands for. It stands for Promoting Recovery, Independence, Dignity, and Equality. And our mission is to build strong families, vital communities, and better futures for children. And we also believe that if a victim of sexual exploitation is supported before his or her decision to exit, then when he or she is ready to make that decision to exit, he or she will feel supported. There's a lot of he or she's in there. What that means is that not everybody that comes through our door is ready to say, I want out. I'm out, I'm tired, I've gone through so much, I'm done being addicted to this, I'm done being in the streets. Not everybody's there. Sometimes they're there and like, I'm just hungry. But you better believe I am going to go make some money after I leave here. And so if we're supporting our clients before they're ready to make that decision, then when they come back and they're ready, they know where to go. And they know that we have a non-judgmental approach to our care. And that's called the trauma-informed care, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. So these are different positions that we have. I'm the client services coordinator. We have a family advocate who works specifically with family-specific issues. Safe harbor advocate, we'll talk a little bit about safe harbor. Criminal justice advocate, a young men advocate who does outreach for young men, and our aftercare support. So this is our philosophy, and we talked a little bit about it. So we believe that prostitution is not a victimless crime. And why do I say that? Because there's a lot of times where you will hear either interviews or just actually plain conversation. Maybe some of you men have been involved in these conversations or overheard them and said, oh man, but she likes it. It's no big deal. Like, she's paying for school. She's starting to be a nurse. That's how she makes her money, right? I'm not forcing anybody to do something. And so there's that mentality of, well, if she wants to do this, then there's no victim involved. She's a willing participant. And so we don't believe in that. And we don't believe in that because we work with the women and the youth that are involved in this lifestyle. And we know that it's not about choice. It's about opportunity of choice. It's about if you have a choice, a bunch of choices that are really terrible, which one are you going to pick? Which one is the least terrible? Right? And so we believe that it's not a victimless crime. We believe that there is a victim and that victim needs services. We talked a little about non-judgmental services. We believe that everyone has a right to a life without violence and a right to his or her own body. Conversation I had with the woman yesterday, and she told me, I just want to be able to own my own body again. I want to own my body again. Because I think, and I know, and conversations that I've had with survivors and clients, that it's like, this is not theirs anymore. It's just like a tool, just an instrument to make money. They shut down, they numb themselves, either with drugs or other things, and they just use this for the benefit of other people. We offer gender-responsive, trauma-informed services. And so gender-responsive, like I showed you, we have a male advocate that works with us, and he does a lot of outreach and does a lot of groups within the community to work with sexually exploited boys, specifically under the ages of 24. So we want to make sure that if somebody comes in, I might not be the best person to serve that boy. And that's okay, or maybe my other advocate might not, because I'm not creating a safe place or an understanding or a connection. That's okay. So then I'm going to then say, you know what? I actually have someone who you might want to talk to more. You don't have to talk to me. And then bring him in, and they might build a connection, you know, depending if that's what the youth wants. And it's trauma-informed. Trauma-informed meaning that, and there's another topic, that's something that, and the reason I'm going kind of slow on this is I want to make sure that I don't lose you throughout the presentation because we're going to be together for a while. And I want to make sure that I kind of go over some of these terms with you. So trauma-informed services, trauma-informed care, really kind of just, in a nutshell, it says, I know it's not me. I know you're not mad at me. I know it's the circumstances that you're in. So if I have a youth, and I also work at a shelter as well here, and I have a youth who is throwing things, and it's like, F you, you're this, you're that, da-da-da-da-da. I just came into work. I literally just budget in. I have like things flying at me. I'm like, okay, trying to de-escalate. You know, what's going on? I could easily be like, you have an anger problem. What is your problem today? Why are you so pissed? Why are you taking it out on me? Why do I get to come to work and you get to yell at me? You know, and then be like, ugh, you're just a bad kid. I'm so tired of you. You're always throwing tantrums. So that is a non-trauma-informed care lens. A trauma-informed care lens would be, what happened? What happened before I came? Before I even clocked in? What happened last week? What happened 2 years ago? What happened the last 15 years? Something had to happen, and this is why you are reacting this way. So I'm not going to blame you for the things that are going on right now, because I know that there's a bigger picture that maybe you felt that you didn't have control over these circumstances, and this is why you are reacting to them. And so that is a trauma-informed care approach, knowing that it's not because they're bad, and it's not because they're whores, and it's not because they like money. It's because there's been systems and things in places in their life that have created these circumstances, and they've followed because of all mental health, chemical dependency, lack of support, trauma in the brain. So all of these things. So these are potentially the things that we will be talking about today. These are the services that we offer, and I kind of went over a little bit We do outreach. We're actually doing a outreach initiative right now in the areas of Lake Street, Bloomington, and Powderhorn neighborhoods. And that's more like in the Minneapolis area. We're going out and we have a grant from City of Minneapolis. And City of Minneapolis is asking us to go out and provide outreach to people that we see in the streets. We have little bags. Our names are on the street outreach. I'm like trying to think what that shirt says. It's a big purple shirt for the Vikings. And we're gonna go out and pass out information, pass out resources, pass out water, toiletries, anything that they might need to survive out there. We do presentations. We work with the policy and systems advocacy, so we work with Hennepin County and the No Wrong Door Initiative to get this going. We have a transitional housing program for our clients. Once they complete our program, they're able to, we provide stipends for scattered sites. So sometimes, actually a lot of times, we work with you guys. So there are some people out there that are willing to work with us despite the fact that our clients, as you can imagine, have unlawful retainers and have eviction notices and have criminal records. So, but they have to be housed, right? So we work with them and we sign the lease with them and we have constant communication with their landlord and ourselves and the participant and talk about what's the best way to support and what our role is. And we do house checks and things like that. So we work alongside a lot of property managers. So, and this is again for the education purposes. This is really important. I don't know if any of you here, you just raise your hands, who knows about the safe harbor law legislation? Just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Maggie, you don't count. 6, 7, okay. So about 7 people, and maybe a few shy ones. So the safe harbor legislation, it was actually passed in 2011, and it went into effect in 2014 after it had been amended a couple of times. So what is the safe harbor legislation? What was it supposed to do? It was supposed to increase penalties against commercial sex abusers, so sex buyers or pimps. Actually, in the beginning, it was really more traffickers, pimps. Now it's moving towards the sex buyer. Provide funding for trauma-informed care, like we talked about, and resources for victims and survivors. And it also allowed Minnesota to create a system that responds appropriately and effectively to child and victims of sexual exploitation. So what does that mean? And we'll talk, the next slide talks a little bit about that. And it also identifies sexually exploited youth under the age of 24, but initially was only to 16, then 18, and now 24. Basically saying you are not a criminal. We're not going to arrest you if you're under the ages of 18, and put you in jail for your own exploitation and your own abuse. If you're a youth under the ages of 18, you are going to be potentially taken to JDC for the moment, and then hopefully transferred to, JDC is the Juvenile Detention Center, transferred to any sort of placement, treatment if there's chemical dependency issues, placed back in care of parents, or whatever really fits for that youth at that moment, right? Not every youth has this particular path. There are many, many different narratives. And so that's what it's saying. Now, 18 to 24, by law, we work with a lot of women who are over 18 years old and who are serving sentences through particularly Hennepin County and City of Minneapolis, and they are serving prostitution charges that they get when they're picked up in stings. And Maggie will go a little bit about what a sting is when she comes and presents. And so what we do as Pride is that, unknowing that a lot of the women who are caught up in these stings or picked up by police have these problems, we come in and we go to the jail and we visit them. And we have a contract with the City of Minneapolis. It's called a pre-charge diversion program. And we say, hey, how are you doing? And they'll be like, and like, well, this is where I'm from. This is what I do. And I'm here to just give you an opportunity. And if you want it, take it. If you don't, that's fine. You can get released in the next 24 hours and get a chemical dependency assessment, which is called a Rule 25. And then after that, we will find you some shelter, whether it's emergency shelter, wherever you need to go, until that treatment place calls you and finds you a bed. You'll go to treatment, you'll spend time in treatment, you'll get clean, and then you'll come to meet with us, and you'll go through our 18 groups and have an advocate that will support you in meeting your goals, and we'll get you out of this lifestyle if this is what you want. And some of them say, no, I don't. A lot of them had gone through a program before and say, it didn't work. I'll just do my time and go. Because you can only hold them for a certain amount of time, right? Until they actually get charged. And a lot of them do. And then we usually have them sign an RI, I go pick them up the next day, and this whole process starts. Is it a successful story right away? Absolutely not. Is there a revolving door? Yes, many times. Many, many times. A woman that's trying to leave the life will try to leave the life at least 7 times before she's actually successful in doing so. Similar to domestic violence, things that we've learned, right? Because that manipulation, that abuse, that psychological abuse is very similar. So it came up with a definition of sexually exploited youth in Minnesota and increased the penalties like we talked about and appropriated funding. So that's if you wanted to read it bigger. So then what happened is that this committee, after they passed the legislation, like, yay, this is great. So what do we do, right? Legislation, great, this is law, but well, how do we implement it? And so a committee of service providers family partnership. We had an amazing, amazing person who did most of our lobbying for family partnership, particularly with the No Wrong Door and the Safe Harbor legislation. And he, and I would say a handful of people really started this movement and got it to pass and implemented the No Wrong Door model. And so this No Wrong Door model is just basically a instructional guide, right? What happens when that child or that youth up to the age of 24 now encounters law enforcement, maybe in a sting at a party, or maybe just picked up on curfew, and they find out that there is or maybe there's belief that there's sexual exploitation involved, that youth is in the life. What happens then? So there's a protocol for that. There's a protocol if that child is then maybe at a group home, and they find out, or maybe at a shelter, that through the phone, something like that, then they are also involved in the life. What is the process for that? What's the protocol? So this No Wrong Door model, which still obviously exists today and it's continuing to be built, and not just recreated but improved, talks about how each one of us has a response. And what's really interesting to me is that the last time I did this presentation, I thought about it and I thought you have become part of the No Wrong Door model. Maybe you're not written in here just yet, and you probably will be, but you as property managers and community leaders have become a part of this, because now we understand and we know that your sites are also being affected. And this is happening in your apartment buildings, it's happening in your homes, it's happening in, whatever else you folks own. And this is happening, and so there needs to be a response for that as well. Right? There needs to be a protocol that's being built. And this is what we're slowly starting with presentations, with education, and then slowly with legislation. And then, I didn't talk about it here, but we're actually moving towards actually creating and pushing a legislation that says safe harbor for all. So not just up to the age of 24, everyone. People that are arrested for charges of prostitution will not serve or will be charged with that charge. Instead, will be provided services. Because if we kind of go back to what I talked about in the timeline, how is it that a 12-year-old is now a 40-year-old, and they miss this whole, yay, safe harbor for all, they were probably only like 30. They missed that. They grew up in a very different world. And now they're still being charged and they're still being punished for their own exploitation and abuse. And so this is where Minnesota is moving to. We're moving to safe harbor for all. We are a model state. There are states that are connecting with us and connecting with Hennepin County and City of Minneapolis and Department of Health, who actually funds the Safe Harbor model, to see what are you guys doing, especially with the Super Bowl coming up. How are you guys doing this? What are you doing? It's super successful. There's money, there's services, the law enforcement's getting involved, the judicial system getting involved, so they're wanting to know how we did it. So this is the actual definition that they came up with. And it's a youth, a male, a female, or a transgender, so it's very inclusive, under the age of 24, who has received anything of value or the promise of anything of value in exchange for sex or sexual acts, including youth who have been coerced and threatened. So why I really like this definition as opposed to, and there's tons of them, right? I mean, you go online and you'll find definitions for days. Why I really like this one is because it doesn't just say that they're exchanging something, but they have the promise of receiving something. They might not receive the money. Most of them don't if they have traffickers. They will not receive the shelter. Maybe they get kicked out. They promise, yeah, you can stay here. Actually, I don't want you. You can go. Right? Maybe they'll receive promise of money. Maybe they'll receive promise of love. And so I like that it encompasses everything that really takes place in the life of a sexually exploited person. So this is what Safe Harbor looks like on the map. This is obviously Minnesota and various different regions. And so what Safe Harbor legislation and then the No Wrong Door model did was say, okay, how are we gonna tackle this? Minnesota is a big state and it looks very different and there's various populations involved. We have tribal communities, we have African American communities, we have refugee communities, how do we do this? And by no means is it perfect now, but it's definitely, like I said, being improved as we get more research. So what they did is said, okay, we're going to divide it into 10, this is 9, but into 10 different regions. So there's going to be a navigator system. And these navigators are going to almost exactly like that, is navigate, facilitate conversations and services to these different regions. So instead of having this one point person, like instead of having me and Maggie be like, okay, where you are, Brainerd? Okay, it's gonna take me a couple hours, which sometimes we do. But instead, we have point people in these different regions that know the services, know the community, know the law enforcement, have connected with them in some way. And when law enforcement picks up, and goes through a sting or picks up a youth and says, I don't know where to take them because they can't take them to JDC, right? Because they're not criminals. So who do I call? They call the navigator. The navigator then is in charge of finding shelter, emergency beds, everything that they need. Maybe that youth needs to go see a medical doctor. Maybe they need a rape kit. Whatever it is they need, they will do it. And it's kind of this like passing off. And the navigator then connects them to all the services, not just family partnership, but the myriad of service providers that are now serving sexually exploited youth in Minnesota. And so that's how that works. So this is the prevalence, and this is this is more like worldwide. And this is definitely changing. It's 2008. I can guarantee you it was more than that in 2008. And definitely more now. So human trafficking is inclusive of sex trafficking and labor trafficking. So what that is, when you hear somebody say human trafficking, sexual exploitation, commercial sexual abuse, all of these different things, how I learned it, because I was like, what the heck, was just think of it as an umbrella. Human trafficking is that umbrella. Under that umbrella, you have various different sectors. So you have labor trafficking, and you have sex trafficking. And so those two operate sometimes together, because a person who's labor trafficked can also be sex trafficked and used for their body instead of just their labor. And a person who's being sex trafficked can also be used for labor trafficking as well. Or they could be, again, completely separate, and one be about labor and one be about sex. So just thinking about that is how you think about human trafficking. And so labor and sex trafficking, 2008, Polaris Project, we'll talk a little bit about them, most likely estimated that traffickers made $31 to $32 billion in the buying and selling of human beings. That's a lot of money. And again, because it's such an underground industry, no stat that you see, even as often as you see it in the internet, and you're like, oh yeah, I've seen that a bunch of times. No stat is accurate. Because how are we going to accurately say how many sexually exploited youth are in Minnesota? Is it because we're working with them? Potentially. What about the ones we're not working with? Is it because law enforcement is recording this information? Right. What about the ones that are not receiving those services and go to JDC for other crimes like shoplifting or whatever it is, but they don't want to talk? Right? So they might be in the criminal justice system, they're going to be in the child protection system, they're going to be in the schools, they're going to be everywhere, but we're not going to be able to identify that. Now, think about it in a larger scale, think about the US. In some states when we don't have safe harbor laws, where people are not willingly coming to creating relationships with law enforcement or other service providers and saying, I need help, right? When they're actually being, through state laws, they're being charged with prostitution despite the fact that they're under 18. So this information I got from various different sources here in Minnesota. So 24 girls under the age of 18 are commercially sexually exploited on a typical weekend night via the internet classifieds. So this is usually Backpage. So 24 girls under the 18 are usually trafficked on a typical weekend night. I can tell you that's probably more. The online sales of minor girls who are being sold for sex in Minnesota increased 55% over a 6-month period. That could be because it increased, or that's because our efforts to try to identify. right? So if we think about stats, it's like, is this a cost or is this an effect? Or is it because we have the things in place to now be able to identify and do something about it and take action? So each month in Minnesota, there's at least 213 underage girls who are sold for sex an average of 5 times per day through the internet and escort services. So that alone, that stat, is most likely something that we can identify through Backpage, right? So someone who's get picked up. I don't know if you've ever seen or heard of Backpage. Have you ever heard of Craigslist? Okay, this is like Craigslist, like evil brother. So it's the same as Craigslist, it's the same platform. You can sell your bike, you can sell your couch, you can sell a car, you can sell your computer. You can also, however, they've managed to find very specific loopholes to sell people for sex. So whether that's that person putting themselves on that website to do that, or whether that's somebody else doing it for them, either way, that's happening. Average age of girls entering into prostitution trafficking is 12 to 14 years old, and that's still true. The local research shows Native Americans and African Americans are disproportionately affected, and this is an actual study that was done here in Minnesota through the UROC Foundation. And so when I sit and I kind of do these presentations, and I have to present it to parents, and I present it to schools and teachers and things like that, well, I do get a lot of these like, oh my God, like this could be my daughter. This could be my niece. This could be, yes, and it could, absolutely it could. Every child, every girl who is attracted to young boys and is susceptible to falling in love way too early is at risk, right? But we know that in Minnesota and in other counties in the US, that it really is actually very specific to certain populations. These populations include African Americans, Native Americans, undocumented people, refugee populations, Latino, Hispanic communities. And so when we think about it, and again, white and Caucasian, absolutely, but it's particularly centered around that. And that's because we're talking about very vulnerable populations as it is in the system, right? And so they're already vulnerable. They already have lack of resources. Maybe they're already living in impoverished areas. They have a lot of police contact. They don't have a lot of familiar support. Single parent household. So all of these things are kind of in place. It's a system that we have here, this pool where everybody starts. Right? And the people that maybe rise above that might have a better chance of obviously not falling into these statistics, and people that don't might not. And so yes, it can happen to everyone, but I do like to be specific because people will always ask me, so why Minnesota? And even though I'm new here, I'm new here, and I lived in California for most of my life, it's kind of the same thing. In California, we had a large community of Latino and undocumented people. These are vulnerable populations that will fall prey to traffickers, to making money, because they might not have access to anything else. Same thing with Minnesota. You have a large population of African Americans. You have a large population of tribal communities here. Populations that don't have access to care, access to services, or very limited if that, right? And so these are the communities that are most impacted. And then you think about Minnesota, and what else does Minnesota have? Mall of America. Mall of America, it's just a place where people come in and out, right? And it's what surrounds Mall of America? Hotels. Tons of hotels. So yeah, and so that makes maybe more susceptible. That is where the money is being made. So you have a lot of people that come into this state for travel, for fun, for this, for that. And because they're not from here, it's kind of this opportunistic kind of behavior. You ever heard of the whole thing says like, whatever happens in Vegas stays in Vegas? You kind of go, you do your thing, and then you go home. And you're not really think about how you impacted that community anyway. I mean, I know I don't. I'm like, oh, it was really fun. And then I come to my own community and I connect with my community leaders and the kids in my community and the schools and the nonprofits. And so there is a lot of influx of travelers in Minnesota that particularly maybe come to see the Mall of America or coming in for business that come in, have fun, and then they leave. What will happen at the Super Bowl? They'll come in, they'll have fun, and they'll leave. And they leave our communities with this idea of like victimless crime, right? I wasn't forcing anybody to do anything while I was there. God, no, because a lot of them don't think of it that way. But in fact, that is what's happening. And who has to then clean up and who has to then provide the services? The communities that are left with this burden, right? And so I know all of you know about the Super Bowl, and we'll talk a little bit more about when we get to the residential portion of this, on why it's so important to be prepared for that and what that means for this particular community. So this is a map, and I kind of told you a little bit about this, is of the 13 cities. This is back in 2008. My citation's not there. 2008, the FBI put together a map and selected 13 cities, 13 major cities that were where the found sex trafficking is most prevalent. Minneapolis is there. New York is there. San Diego is there. San Francisco. These are pretty big cities. Los Angeles, Las Vegas, Miami. What else are they? Can we think about if there are any commonalities? Airports, yes, airports, so access. Anything else? I'm sorry? Border states, yes, they're border states. And so that might make us think, oh, they're border states, so they're flying in international victims in. Okay, so then all of the victims are from Taiwan, or all the victims are from, China. All these victims are from different areas of the globe. We might want to think that, and that is true, and that narrative does exist. And I'm not here to debunk any of that. But what we also know is that it's easier to get in and out of. Like we said, airports, right? And so a lot of the girl and the youth that I've worked in, a lot of them work in their communities, but a lot of them fly out. And they're flying to various states to make more money. Because maybe it's not as hot in Vegas now as it is in Minneapolis. During the February 2018, it'll be very hot in Minneapolis. There'll be lots of money to be made. That is where they're flying. That is where the trafficker is purchasing tickets and saying, we're making money here. We're going there. What are we doing? We're getting hotels. Too expensive. What do we do? I know a buddy. He has an apartment. I got this. I know you're like, oh my God, we're going to get to that. Another thing about Minnesota is that I want to point out is its location. So it's actually has really great access to other cities. And what do you know about the 94 interstate? You can take that all the way to Chicago. You can take that interstate and you can take it all to California. You can take it down to Texas. You can take it anywhere you want. It's access. So if you're not flying and you're driving, it's just 2 nights in a car, passed out in the back. By the time you get there, you're in a different hotel in a different city with different people. And so that is how we understand why this is happening in different cities. Another thing is the Dakotas. What happens in the Dakotas? What are they known for? This is not a bad thing. So what are they known for? We're like, I don't know. What are they known for? Oil. So what is oil? What's common in oil production? Money, right? Work, right? I mean, there's people that are making a lot of money in the oil production. There's people that are working. People that are laborers, that maybe travel from various other states like Kansas or Arkansas or things like that, and they go up to the Dakotas to make money for 6-8 months, maybe a year, right? Stash that money, go home and say, hey, honey, for the kids, I made this much money. This is going to get us through the winter. So you have a lot of workers without their families. You have a lot of men that spend time in the Dakotas in hotel rooms alone. I'm not making a generalized comment, because that is not the case for every person. But I'm saying that is, again, what the system kind of lays out, right? And so if you know that there's money and there's that demand, the supply follows. It's there to make money. It's very much a market. It's a business. And who found this out? Dr. Lauren Martin, who's been working here in Minnesota or I think she's from Minnesota, and she's working at the UROC Foundation for, I think, over 20 years, studying this stuff. Before it ever became a hot topic, before human trafficking ever became a big thing, before sexually exploited youth was like, oh my gosh, let's rescue everybody. This was something that she spent most, if not all, of her funds and grants on. And she did something that's called mapping the market. And she did it specifically with Minneapolis, because I imagine they would take a lot of money to do it for the entire state of Minnesota. So she picked Minneapolis and the Twin Cities as a place to start. And she said, I want to, based on law enforcement service providers and interviews with victim survivors, where is this happening? So where is the demand and where's the supply? So right here we have the green is a recruitment location. So where are these people living that they're being recruited? They're living in North Minneapolis, we see that. They're living in the Brooklyn Center area. They're living in Plymouth, Golden Valley, Roseville, Richfield down at the bottom. So if you could just imagine, and like what communities live in these areas. You know, we have to talk about it, but like just imagine like what populations live where, right? So then you have that, and then they're asking, okay, so where's this transaction location happening? So the transaction location is happening mainly in the Twin Cities, in the metro area right here. But it's also happening outside of that. It's happening in Ridgefield. Where's the other blue button? Blue, I forget. Broken Center, no, that's a green. So they're saying it's happening concentrated in the cities. So then she followed up with a different study that just recently came out. And I think you folks have probably seen it, or maybe you haven't. And I pull it up. I don't have it's a really long report, so I wanted to really share it with you here. So then she said, I want to map the demand. So I want to know who's buying. Who are the buyers? Who are the traffickers? In her last one, in Mapping the Market, she identified who are the victims, where are they from? And they're from these surrounding areas, right? They're from these maybe kind of like more poverty-stricken communities, less access to services, things like that. Brooklyn Center, Plymouth area, maybe like northern greater Minnesota. But where is it actually happening? The transactions are happening in the city. So now she wanted to know, okay, and then she also said, apologized, and she also identified who the traffickers are. So where do the traffickers live? The traffickers live in the same areas as most of those youth, or those kids, because she specifically did it under the age of 24. And they're living in Plymouth, and Brooklyn Center, and Brooklyn Park, and Roseville, and maybe Richfield. That's where they're living. Where are the buyers living? The buyers are living in surrounding suburb areas. They're living in Edina. They're living in Bloomington. They're living in nicer areas because there's a higher flow of cash, right? So one of the things that she did, which I think was really good, is this is how she gathered her research. And if you have the opportunity to see her, please do. She's absolutely amazing. And the work that she's been doing, I've been following since I've been in California. So I had the pleasure of meeting her. I was like, oh my God, like an idol. So, so she does amazing work. And this is how she collected her data through law enforcement, prosecutors, then youth services, domestic violence, sexual assault services, and things like that. And then she said, okay, so then she identified who's the sex buyer, who's the provider, who's the victim and trafficker. I said, who purchases? So the people that are purchasing are middle-aged, white, married men from across the whole state of Minnesota. That is the data that they found that confirms that. People like businessmen, doctors, lawyers, dentists, judges, professors, police officers, correctional officers, pastors, da-da-da-da. So all employments. There's not discriminatory against who is who or what they do. It's all employments across the board. But what is common about that is like if you look at the access to money. So who has the power? If we're talking about this being a supply and demand situation, who has the power? The person who has the power has the money, right? And so that is who feeds that system. So, and this is why I don't like calling them Johns, because I feel like that is such a nice name, and that's my friend's name. And I honestly believe that not every person in this, who I meet or categorize as a white middle-aged man, is a sex buyer. That's not the case. But that is what the data is telling us in some way, right? But there's exceptions to that. So they're also saying that they're traveling 30 to 60 miles to purchase sex, that they're not actually having these transactions and interactions with the victims in their home area, in their neighborhoods. They're traveling to do that. How do they enter the marketplace? They enter through the social media, they enter through direct online ads, or through the deep web, and this is a very small category of people that are particularly more interested in like child pornography or fetishes, things like that. So there's also that category of person. Then there's a regular old guy who maybe just goes into social media. Back page. I'm in North Dakota, South Dakota, I'm working, I'm lonely, I'm tired. Let me see what's out there. Word of mouth. So this is just, I'm not going to go through the whole thing because it's quite large, but I wanted to show you that is the most recent study that came out not even more than 2 months ago that talked about how Minnesota is being impacted. These are things that it includes. It's not inclusive of every single way that sex trafficking is viewed. But street prostitution, pornography, stripping, erotic nude massage, and escorting, online exploitation. So we think of stripping and being like, doesn't mean it's not really sex trafficking, right? Because when we think of sex trafficking, we think of taken. Or we think of someone who's like willingly stepping into that. So we're like, well, that's not, I mean, she wants to do it, she's getting a lot of money from it. That is how that can occur, and it also is a way for it to occur. We talked a lot about environmental factors. We talked about why that's happening in the communities that we're living in or that we're seeing in that research, right? The transient male population, coming in and out, various events. San Diego was very big on that. And that's something where we focused a lot, is that San Diego is a tourist city. Everybody wants to go to San Diego. It's beautiful. So the airport is super busy. There's hotels are always booming, conventions, all sorts of stuff. So that is where our law enforcement, our service providers really put in our effort to make sure that we were tackling that part of the system and the demand. What are some social reasons why this is happening? So one of the biggest ones that I'll tell you, and again, because we talked about systemic reasons, is sexism. I'm not here to change sexism. I'm not here to educate you on sexism. I'm not here to make you a feminist, unless you want to be. That's okay. But I am here to talk about that it's a systematic problem. And if we perpetuate and feed into that system, we are going to get the same results, as we've seen time and time again. If men have more power than women, if it's okay to beat women, if it's okay to degrade women, or people from LGBTQ communities, or transgendered people. If that is okay, this is what's being condoned in our society, then what is our behavior going to look like? It's going to look offensive. It's going to look demeaning. It's going to look violent. There's a glorification of money, glorification of pimp culture. And this is an older group, but I often do these presentations with youth in schools, and they look at me like, what? Like, that's not, and it's like, but you see it in like all the videos and all the media stuff, and everything is out there that's saying sex, 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 right? Like how short can your skirt be? How this can, so all of these things, or are we teaching our women and our boys on how to have healthy relationships with each other? Like relationships where it's not based on the power and control. So these are some of the reasons why a lot of the people that I've seen and worked with have a hard time exiting the life. And this is not, again, inclusive, and it's not every narrative, but it's to the majority. And I should say, and I didn't say this earlier, the PowerPoint that you're seeing today is a PowerPoint that I've been working and building for the last, I want to say 6 years or so, 5 years, and I've built it with survivors. This is information that I've gotten from people that I've worked with, their own personal stories, which is obviously not included in here, but trying to get the information that's most accurate. While I consider myself an expert, I am not the expert because I'm not a survivor. And I cannot say that this was my experience, but I do take it very seriously that I'm here telling that story in my own way, trying to get whatever information I can from them to educate the community. So there's all sorts of things. There's a criminal record, chemical dependency, afraid of the stigma. You're going to lose money. A lot of the young girls that I was working with were 16 years old, 15 years old, and they were out making money soliciting. And I'd be like, all right, what are your goals? Like, you want to get a job, da-da-da. And they're like, yeah, I want to get a job, okay. So like, all right, we buy interview clothes, set up with a resume, go to McDonald's, she has her interview, she gets the job. She's like, oh my God, my first job, oh my gosh, my first paycheck, this is great. She gets a paycheck, she's like, what? She's like, $150, and we're like, yeah, that's what, she's like, what the? And she's like, this is not enough. I have a kid, I have 2 kids, I have to help my mom. This isn't good for me, right? So it's like, how do you say, wait, hold on, think about the next 25 years when you don't build any skill set at all, and you'll still have to have entry-level jobs in McDonald's if you continue to, let this lifestyle kind of take you. So there's all of those conversations. Afraid to leave. It's dangerous and life-threatening. I have not met one client who has told me that they haven't gotten beaten up either by a sex buyer, their pimp, or just in a situation where they shouldn't have been by other girls who are in the life as well. It's always violent. Some are more violent than others, but it's always violent because that is what is used. Those are the control tactics that are used to keep people in the life. Fear, violence, physical violence. there's needs. These are all the different needs that they require, and then more, right? And treatment for chemical dependency, safe housing, legal advocacy. You know, we always strive to work with property managers, because if we can't house these clients, then what are we saying? Okay, so you're still homeless, but still, please, do not go out there and try to make money the only way you know how. Just try to stay away from it, okay? So how is that? We're not going to provide a stabilization for them. And we all know that housing is stabilization. If you have a place to lay your head, if you know where you're going to go home every night, then you can worry about other things, right? You can start worrying about getting a job. You can start worrying about going back to school. Start worrying about maybe getting a car, saving up for stuff. So like, these are things that you can think about when you have that housing component. When you don't have it, then it's just a cycle over and over and over again. You have some handouts, and the reason why I hand it out is because it's a very small print, and I always feel really bad for people like, what the? Because I can't even read it sometimes. So this is something that we use within therapy when we work with clients. Because we want, and this is something that was created after the domestic violence will, which was done by, again, the Polaris Project, which is a nonprofit agency completely funded by federal funds, and then obviously community funds and things like that. So their focus is human trafficking, both labor and sex trafficking, and they come up with, I mean, they have a hotline, they have services, they have law enforcement they work with, and they're completely national. International. So this is something that we use in groups. A lot of things what I did in my past jobs is that I do that now actually too, is I facilitate groups with youth and women. And we talk about what that looks like. We talk about their experiences. We talk about educating them on the stuff that I'm educating you on, because I can tell you one thing is that both youth, particularly youth, but then also women, will never come to you and say, yeah, I'm actually a sexually exploited victim. They'll be like, I'm a prostitute. I'm a hoe. This is what I do. I sell my body. That character, that has already been completely torn down. So they're going to identify themselves as a prostitute, a hooker. They're not going to see their experience as being victimized. They're going to see it like, and this has to do with trauma, is you want to get over and to overcome trauma, we want to name trauma. We want to have control over our trauma. We want to say, I was not a victim, I chose this. Because when we don't say that, then we think we're weaker. And this expands to all trauma impact. And so you want to name it, you want to say, no, that was my choice. I chose to do that. And I had to deal with the consequences because of it. And so that is a lot of the conversations that we have. And so we educate and provide education around, no, actually, yes, you had this choice. I'm not taking that away from you. You're not a lifeless person. You have a choice. But let's think about what options you had in the first place. And why is it that you felt like you needed to make that choice? And so we use this, and we talked about the economic abuse and the emotional abuse and the isolation and the sexual abuse that maybe has happened to them even before they entered the life as young children, which is very, very common. 90% of clients or youth that go into the life will report that they have had some sort of sexual abuse as children, whether it was familial or whether it was with a stranger. So there's all these things that we use, and you can name it. You say, hey, that happened to me. Oh, man, I didn't see that. Wow, you know, and sometimes it's like, no, it didn't happen to me too. So like you see it all across the board, like this exercise is stupid. So, especially with youth. So there's various different reactions to it. But that's something to look at. I think it's very important. And then we talk a little bit about the psychological, emotional impact, the spiritual impact, the physical impact, the emotional impact, the social impact. So this is a lot of words. And I purposely did not zoom in. And I purposely I'm not going to go over every single one, don't worry. But I purposely want to show you intentionally that this is how a person who is being sexually exploited, how they're being impacted, in what ways. In every way that you can imagine. This, again, was created by GEMS. GEMS is an organization, a nonprofit, the leader of this movement since, and New York was the first state to pass safe harbor laws. And they have a girls' education mentoring system services. And they work with and train communities in New York City and all over the US and all over the world. She was just here recently. And they talk about, this is what survivors are saying. This is not what therapists are saying. This is what the survivors are saying. The level of emotional impact, the mental health that occurs because of that, the social impact and the stigma and feeling ostracized from your own society, the physical impact, the spiritual impact, all of this doesn't mean that it's inclusive to every person that enters and exits the life, but to some degree, depending how long you're in it, you're gonna be impacted by these things. Whether it's up to you to deal with them now or later when you come to the realization that you were a victim, that's up to them. One of the things that I like to bring up is that often, and we're not getting much questions here, but somebody refers, there's also the term of sex work. I'm sure a lot of you heard of it, and there's a controversy on like, what is sex work, what is sex trafficking, what is exploitation, what is human trafficking, what's the difference, and what is okay to say. So when I think of sex, when I think of work, I think of what I do, my work, right? So I'm standing here, probably the worst thing that could happen is my feet are really gonna hurt at the end of the night because I'm wearing these heels and I should have worn flats. That's okay. But that's maybe the worst thing, and I'm gonna experience a level of vicarious trauma working with clients, right? I'm gonna have to do a lot of self-care to take care of that. I've been doing it for years, so I know what my experiences are and what my methods are to take care of myself. I don't know any job that I would ever get, any job, I can't even think of, and maybe you will stump me, any job that you can find where this will be what you might be impacted with. If you stay 2-3 years. Where you might have dissociative disorders, anxiety, paranoia, clinical depression, explosive outbursts, post-traumatic stress disorder, hypersexualization. Well, you have deep emotional pain, self-blame, anger, rage, isolation, you know, rape, STDs, unwanted pregnancies, unwanted abortions. I don't know what job you can ever get where these will be like the, oh, warning, side effects of this job. So I have a very hard time calling it work. For me, it's not work. That's not the work that we're used to. It's not. So I want to move to, and I want to see if anybody has any questions. You've been listening to me talk a lot. I know this is kind of new information for some of you, or maybe not. Yes, and where's my mic lady? Oh, Maggie. Do you? Yes, please, yes. And this young lady over here. Is it Paula? Yes. Okay, and he'll bring you the mic.
So I'm curious, with the clients that you work with when they do want to get out, what percentage of them have a family that they can go?
Oh, they
live
can go
with?
back too?
Yeah, because you mentioned transitional housing many
Sure.
times. Do they always,
Yep.
nobody goes back to a family?
In my personal experience, I think the stats would be a little bit skewed, but in my personal experience working with the family partnership, we have a family advocate, and that family advocate looks to reunite a lot of the women with their children that they might have lost in this system. There are definitely a amount of parents that feel that they need to reconnect with their daughters or their sons after that. But if we think about, and there are there, right? We work with a lot of parents that are involved in saying, I don't know what's wrong with my kid. I don't know what's happened to my kid. Can you please like talk with her or provide therapy? And so we're like, oh, sure, absolutely. But then when we talk about like the older population, we're talking about 30s and 40s, these are women or men that have been in this lifestyle for a number of years. And through chemical dependency, right? And through homelessness and through abuse and all of that might have severed those ties with their family members. And I've been like, I'm done. And then there's also that society stigma of like, you're a prostitute. And if you lived and worked in your community, then everybody knows that's what you do and who you are. So it's like scarlet letter, right? So a lot of families don't want to reunite with their spouses, and actually not many spouses that I know of, or I've seen more of that in youth, I have to say. More of that in youth when I worked in California. I've seen a lot of it when the parents were still involved, but were also very unaware of the things that had happened in that child's youth for why this happened and this occurred. So I don't know if that answers your question. So there's some and there's some not. It's a tough distinction to make. But thank you for your question. Anybody else? Got it. Anybody else? No? Yes, yes.
Like you mentioned about, it takes about 7 times for a person to keep going in and then finally they get themselves in there.
On average,
To
yeah.
what extent do you guys stop offering your services, or do you even stop?
We don't. We do not stop. We stop when you want to stop. We'll be there. And we'll be there being like, so happy to see you. Not like, man, last time you were here, you like totally tore up the group room. You know, it's like, but it's like, no, like, hey, so glad to see you. What do you need? Are you hungry? Are you thirsty? Do you need shoes? Do you need clothes? What can we help you with? Your advocate's no longer here because she left to another agency, but let me introduce you to so-and-so. We don't stop. And that's a beauty, I think, about the family partnership in general, is that we serve across the lifespan. And if what we know is true, which it is that they're coming in and out of that lifestyle multiple times. And 7 is an average, sadly, because when I think about a 54-year-old woman that I met last night, we put in a hotel room for safe housing, I wonder how many times she tried to leave. Probably is more than 7, I would say, if she had gone into the life at the age of 13. Right? So it's like, and she kept coming in, and she knew about our program. And she didn't know me. I had not met her because she had been there before, but it's still that very non-judgmental, trauma-informed, you are welcome here. When you're ready, we are ready. When you're not ready, we're still here. And if you need food or anything else, we can absolutely help you. Some programs are different. Some programs get funding and they're very limited to the age they can work with. So if they're working with youth or up to the age of 24, it really depends, honestly, on their funding and their capacity. We are very lucky at the Family Partnership that we can serve across. And we actually serve generations, which is really sad. So there's a lot of times that we go into the system and we have a tracking system where you will have a mother, you will have a grandmother, a mother, and a daughter, all involved in the same lifestyle because of the systematic reasons why this happens that we talked about, right? So it's generational. So what we really want to do is we want to, okay, let's focus on that last generation. We can help them provide services and maintain, but let's help and prevent this from escalating. So where yet another generation is impacted by this and this families. So is that answering your question? Thanks. So I know we have a few minutes. We're gonna go ahead and stop unless anybody has any other questions or comments. Yes?
Just wondering about funding.
Oh yes, absolutely. Can we, where's the mic? Sorry. That's a very good question. She wanted to know about funding. What in specific do you want to know?
I was just wondering about funding. Where does the funding come from? Is it state, federal? Is it limitless? It sounds, I'm thinking if you're saying, do you need clothes? Do you need food? Do you need housing? Is there a limit to how much you can provide for each person?
That's a very good question because in the life of nonprofits, there's never enough funding, right, to do what you want to do. And so our funding, specifically to Safe Harbor, is funded by Minnesota Department of Health. So they have taken on this whole Safe Harbor legislation that we will fund service providers, we will fund training, we will fund maybe parts or areas of the law enforcement. They come in and how they work with this population. And so they've taken that on to fund that, which is very different from many states because you can pass a Safe Harbor law all you want, but then how do you appropriate funding? Who is going to help implement this? So Minnesota is very specific and so unique in that way that they thought about it. We're not just going to pass this, we have to pay for it. And so that's what they've done, which is unlike many other states. And then to answer your other question is that we don't have this like endless bottomless thing that we're like, oh, we have so many more clothes. So what we do is what a lot of nonprofits do is that we partner with each other. I might not have a food shelf that can feed a 5. But I know that on Tuesdays and Thursdays, there's a food shelf, and you and I can go there. Let's go. Let's set an appointment. All right, 2 p.m. I'll see you with your kids. Great. We'll go pick up all the food that we can, take it to your house, right? And so we do have other funding. We're funded by the Office of Justice, Department of Justice, and we have a large funding to work with sexually exploited women. And then Safe Harbor funds us through that youth portion as well. So we are very lucky in that way. And Office of Justice also funds our transitional housing program as well. And we've been staying in business for a very long time, and I think it's because our work is very meaningful in that way. But thank you so much for your question. It's a very important one. Does anybody else have any questions that they might have? Yes? Oh, okay.
I have a curiosity question. When you were talking about putting this 54-year-old woman in a hotel, and you say sometimes it's 7 times before they basically come out of the system. So what is the percentage, and this is like as a curiosity,
Sure.
How many take advantage of your generosity? Oh, you got me a room, now I'm in business for the night.
Sure.
Is
Probably a good portion of them.
Okay.
Definitely some. And I had this conversation with my case manager yesterday with what she was saying, and I was like, man, do we need to check in on her like later on? She's like, well, whether we check in on her or not, this is gonna happen. I said, you're right. And what are we in the business for? We're in the business to help people. I'm not in the business to say, I'm only gonna help you if you promise me that you're not gonna go back to that pimp. Because if you do it, I'm not gonna help you again. So that again is a non-judgmental, right, approach, or judgmental approach. And so yeah, a lot of them come in and out, and I need this, and I need that, da, da, da. We always, in the family partnership as well, in the Pride program, really strive to create self-sufficiency. So if someone's coming to us multiple times and saying, man, and actually we had this conversation with my other case manager, we need to buy this person groceries. Every month, we need to buy them groceries, you know? And I'm like, okay, well, what is happening here, right? It's like, how are we going to help them become sustainable and self-sufficient if we're always buying their groceries? There's something else that we need to be helping with. So what is their bigger cost? Rent? Maybe they should be in our housing program. We can help them pay for the stipend so they have, because this woman has a job. She's like 4 kids. So it's hard for her to have a job, pay for rent, everything else. So what else can we help or move around, right? We can't buy, it's not sustainable, and it's not best practices. So what can we do then to help you and your family? Rather than say, oh, here. And so that person then stops learning or wants to stop learning to figure out themselves. Like, well, if I can, I mean, how many of us would be like, well, if somebody wants to give me $1,000, I just won't go to work for this week, right? Of like, me. So that is a very common thing. And also that survival mentality. Because every time they're out in the streets, young or old, they're thinking, how am I gonna get this? How am I gonna get shelter? How am I gonna get food? How am I gonna get that? Where am I gonna sleep tonight? How am I gonna do this? How am I gonna get that drug? How am I gonna get that? You know, so it's all about how am I going to hustle? And maybe there wasn't one in there, but how am I gonna hustle for my needs every day? And that is a survivor mentality that we eventually and absolutely encounter. Yes, sorry.
Hi. No
Thank you for your
problem.
question.
Hopefully I have the last question for you. But how do you deal when you're dealing with your clients that have multiple layers going on? So they've got drug addictions, they've got mental health issues, you know. How do you do that? Because I've encountered folks in the past that have been trafficked, but because they've not been taking their medication, you know, just trying to get them to focus. So it's like, okay, what do I take care of first here?
Absolutely. That's a great question. And that kind of brings it back to that trauma piece, that complex trauma, right? And so if some person has experienced trafficking, you better believe they've experienced sexual abuse, or maybe they've experienced domestic violence, and they've also experienced maybe chemical dependency, which got them through their exploitation to numb themselves and get through it. They've experienced working with the criminal justice because they've gotten picked up on various offenses. So they have all of these issues, and they come and they're like, I need help. Okay, well, what can I help you with? I need this. And you're like, okay, all right. So let's sit down. Let's do an intake. We'll figure it out. What do we need? What do we need first? Are you hungry? I'm hungry. Okay, we'll get you food. Do you have a place to sleep? No, I don't have a place because I got attacked, so I stopped taking my medications and I punched the staff. Okay, so we won't take you back to that shelter. We have some connections, and we'll go ahead. I'm going to reach out to so-and-so, and we'll see where we can get you in there. Or maybe we get you a hotel for the night because maybe you're violent, and so we want to make sure. But you have chemical or mental health issues. In the morning, I'll pick you up from the hotel. We're going to take you to get a psychiatric assessment, get you back on those meds, so then you can feel normal and stable, and then you can make correct decisions, right? Not punch people in the face. Because sometimes they're like, I'm just reacting to everything that's happened to me. And so to answer your question is just one thing at a time. And I really start with what is the most meaningful thing? What is the thing that everybody deserves to have? They deserve to have food, and they deserve to have shelter. So if I can help you with those 2 things, I will talk to you tomorrow, and we will figure the rest out step by step. And I say, I'm not gonna be doing this, you're gonna be doing this, I'm your chauffeur, and I'll guide you. And a lot of times, a lot of the people I've worked with have been like, oh, thank you so much, you did this for me, and da-da-da. And I'll sit there and be like, this person is so amazing. And it's like, I didn't do anything. I just gave you the resources that you needed. And I said, you can do it, you're amazing, you're phenomenal, I can help you access, but you're in the driver's seat. And I'm just hanging out, telling jokes, eating food. And that, you know, it's just one day at a time. But there is a lot. And mental health is a big piece that gets in the way of that, unfortunately, because it's a barrier every time. Chemical dependency, it's a barrier every time. So that it is when that revolving door keeps swinging. Thank you for your question. So one of the things that we also passed out in that packet, as well as the wheel, there's a story. I believe the story is in the very back. And let me just do this. So the first part says how to identify it. It should be page right before the wheel, just like a Word doc.
It's on, so whenever.
Great, thank you so much. What's your name?
My name's Michelle.
Michelle. Thanks so much, Michelle. I appreciate it. I know it's not easy.
Okay, the Normal Storg bank robbery. On August 23rd, 1973, in Stockholm, Sweden, a prison escapee named Jan Erik Olsson entered a bank, fired a submachine gun, and announced to the terrified bank employees, "The party has just begun." When police entered the bank, Olsson shot and seriously wounded one police officer. A hostage situation ensued, and Olsson held 4 people captive in the bank vault. He demanded 3 million kronor, weapons, and an escape car. Most importantly, Olsson demanded the release of Clark Olofsson,
Thank you. I know it's hard.
a big-time
That's gonna give you a
criminal
warning.
who was then serving time in prison, and requested that Olofsson be brought to the bank. Olsson's request was granted. For 6 days, the 2 robbers held the hostages, who were locked in a bank vault, at gunpoint, sometimes strapping the victims with explosives or forcing them to tie nooses around their own necks. When the police tried to rescue the hostages fought off the authorities, defending their captors and blaming the police. The hostages were strapped with dynamite and held in the vault until they were finally rescued on August 28th. To the surprise of many, some of the hostages physically protected the robbers, Olsson and Olofsson, as they left the bank to ensure the police wouldn't shoot the 2 men. After their rescue, the hostages exhibited a shocking attitude, considering that they had been threatened and abused for nearly 6 days and should have feared for their lives. In media interviews, it was clear that the hostages supported their captors and actually feared the law enforcement personnel who came to their rescue. The hostages felt the captors were protecting them from the police. Clearly, the hostages had bonded emotionally with their captors. One hostage set up a fund to cover the robbers' legal fees and remained friends with one of the men for years.
What are some response? I could hear it kind of in the audience, like, what the? Right. So that's kind of bizarre, right? You're probably wondering, why am I reading this? So I wanted to go over as like a little activity. Thank you so much, Michelle, for reading that. So I think you read the story and you think, why would someone, after being abused or mistreated, physically hurt, all of those things, why would that person then find a way to support and help and aid the one person who did this to them? That just doesn't really make much sense, does it? When we think about revenge, when we think about hurt and pain, we don't think about having those two flipped. And so what this is Stockholm Syndrome. I don't know if you've ever heard of that term before, which is why it's in the city of Stockholm. And so Stockholm Syndrome is actually a very common trauma response when a specific victim, specifically sexual trauma, or really most of anything but sexual trauma, will do whatever they can do to protect the person that hurt them. So right here, if we can look back in this story, what are some things that you think happened to these people, these hostages, that could have made them feel afraid of their lives, for their lives? Anything in particular in that story? What happened? What traumatic events happened to them throughout this? Obviously, they were captured and they were in a vault. That's pretty traumatic, right? But what happened throughout this time? Their lives were in danger, right? So their lives were in danger, yes. Anybody else? Anything specific? Yes?
They had dynamite strapped to them. They had nooses around their neck and probably were allowed to remove them for water to take back or whatever.
Right, so they had dynamite strapped in their backs. They were allowed to remove them from time to time, maybe begging for water or food, and then they were being strapped on with again. So it almost sounds like psychological manipulation, right? Like, I can kill you, but I'm letting you live, and I'm gonna give you some water. You should be thankful. You should be grateful, because you're probably thirsty. So anything else? And those were really good. Anything? Yes?
Well, they witnessed a death. They shot somebody.
They shot somebody. So they were witness to a horrible event, right? Someone they may have known as well. So then there's that fear of that happening to them. They were in it for 6 days. 6 days. But then you still think 6 days and you're going to pay for this guy's like medical bills and legal fees? Right? So when you think about us holding a grudge with maybe a family member, someone we know, probably know for a lot longer, and we still takes a long time for to be like, I'm not helping you right now, and draw those boundaries. So then they were locked in the bank. We talked at gunpoint, sometimes strapping the explosives, and that's what we said over here. Oops. So out of all of these things, these are things that they've experienced for 6 whole days. Something in there, that manipulation, that physical abuse, that witnessing of horrible events happening to them, that feeling of like, maybe I need to be grateful for this. Maybe you saved my life in some weird way. You could have killed me, but you saved me. And so there is, and even these are probably adult people. When you think about youth and we think about people that are just kind of starting to develop their own brains, and then we then apply that manipulation to that developing brain, what does that do? It goes haywired. I don't know what's right, I don't know what's wrong. I don't know if you're good or if you're bad. People have been telling me you're really bad for me, but then you do all these nice things for me. But then you're mean to me again. So which is it, right? So there's that confusion of like, what are their motives? So in order for Stockholm Syndrome, trauma bonds is another way of talking about it. To be present, there has to be a perceived threat to one's physical or psychological survival. The belief that that abuser would carry out the threat. And we're talking about the dynamite, right? We're talking about witnessing they already killed somebody. So they're capable of doing that. A perceived small kindness from the abuser to the victim. They were fed. Although that's so very small compared to what they were experiencing, they were fed. Again, something that might manipulate your brain into thinking that, I don't know about this person. Isolation from perspectives other than those of the abuser. Why do they turn on the cops and the law enforcement? We're in that vault for 6 days, just seeing that, right? And maybe talking amongst themselves and being like, I don't know, I mean, I guess he could have killed us, but he's not, right? And just seeing that one perspective. There's a perceived inability to escape the situation. In this particular situation, they're actually physically restrained. They're in a vault, they're not going anywhere, right? But it's also the perceived inability. So if they weren't in a vault and they were in the park, or switching that over, if they are victims of sex trafficking and exploitation and they don't have any restraints. We're not seeing these survivor victims being tied up to anything. Not the way that we see them in Google Images, right? Which is like, oh, the girl, tied to the radiator, or like stuck in a basement somewhere, which it does happen. And like I said, I'm not going to debunk that. But that's not often what happens. That is not often what happens at all. So what does it look like on victims of commercial sexual exploitation? How are they formed? Violence and threats of violence. So that's, again, the same idea that when those people, the bank tellers were in there, there was a threat of violence, a threat to their lives. Then they're alternating violence and kindness, which increases bonding. So a lot of times what I hear from my clients is, and specifically younger ones, because again, this is that developing brain. And I would say, actually, correct myself, it continues to go on because it's something that is manipulation that carries through years and years and years. Inability to see anybody's perspective. If you're just with this trafficker all day long, all you see is this trafficker's perspective. This life is all you know. And so there is beatings. There is leave them out in the cold. There is starving them. And not by being like, I'm going to lock you up somewhere. Like, yeah, I don't really feel like going to get you something to eat. I'm tired. I'm just going to go to bed. She hasn't eaten all day. All day. What are they going to do? They're just going to sit there and be like, okay, great, I'm not eating again today. Right? And maybe I'm not eating because I should have made more money. Maybe next time I'm going to make more money so then I could get fed. And I'm not going to be a loudmouth. I'm not going to be out of pocket because then I won't be able to get my basic needs met. And then, after the beating and after all of that, that person comes back and says, man, I brought you some food. I know you're hungry. Or, let's go get your nails done. Let's go do something nice. A little niceness for you, right? Or, you know I love you. You know I care about you. You know I couldn't be doing these things without you. So then you start, it's again that confusion of like, I don't know. And that's a domestic violence victim. It's a very, very distinct path that has been researched and data has been collected and books have been written about it and treatments have been implemented. So we know this to be true. And this is something that sex trafficking, sexual exploitation, it has a direct correlation with domestic violence, that manipulation piece, whether psychological or whether physical. Let's read it from here. Sorry, I have not been giving you a lot of love. I'm sorry, I'll walk this way. I'm not even left-handed. So then there's the shame and stigma associated with prostitution. So if you're gonna leave, who's gonna want you? You're a hoe. Who's gonna want you? Your mom? Nope. Your dad? Nope. Who's gonna want you? Your grandma? You screwed her over. So it's that idea of like, no one's gonna want you if I don't want you. If you leave me, nothing good will happen to you. Except, in addition to the fact that you will not have a place to sleep or anything to eat. And the rape it creates the losing the virginity and increases the bonding. This is something that is very, very common within young persons who are first exploited and first turned out. And that's a term. So when they're first turned out, they're turned out usually by the control of their trafficker. That trafficker knows when and where and by who that person is going to lose their virginity to, is going to be raped. They set it up typically because they know that at that moment, they know how to control it. They're making money off of it. They know that as soon as a person is broken and broken and broken and broken and broken again, that spirit dies. And they're easily controlled. And like, look at you now. You already sold it for money. You already gave it away for money. Who's going to want you now? And so it's using those tactics and manipulations. And then also even from the love perspective. So I love you. You're my girlfriend. You're my baby. You're my ride or die. You're everything to me. And that person's 13 and the other person's like 35. And losing that virginity at that age creates that type of bonding. And I think we all know that teenagers, and being teenagers ourselves, like it creates a sense of intimacy. So then you battle intimacy with common sense at a very young age. Not a good mix, right? Not going to be very successful. So what are some major indicators? So there's shows of symptoms of trauma or PTSD. PTSD is post-traumatic stress disorder syndrome. And that is something that 99.9%, and this is probably a really stat, but honestly, I can't tell you how many clients I've worked with that have a diagnosis of PTSD because of recurring trauma. So if you think of someone experiencing rape and being raped by someone, and there's that trauma involved with it, and then they have to work through it in therapy, they have flashbacks, and they can't go to certain places, and they smell certain things that remind them of that event. So think about that same person being raped over and over and over and over and over again. How many years of therapy? How many flashbacks? How much trauma does that person have to get over to get past the first year of their lives, or first month or 2 months of their lives being in the life? So there's that recurring exposure to trauma that really creates so much negative impact in our brains, in their brains, that it takes years and years and years to fully find treatment for or get treatment for. So another thing that you'll see is that they're intensely grateful for small kindness. They're really eager to be like, oh my God, thank you so much. You know, thank you. And that's even with us. That's when they finally come to us and we're serving them. Oh my God, thank you so much. Oh my gosh, thank you. I can't, it's like, it's okay. You're good. You don't have to thank me. This is what I do. This is my job. You saved me. Oh my gosh. And it's like, it's that idea of that, like that trauma bonding. Denies violence when violence or threats of violence are actually occurring. I can't tell you how many times I've worked with clients that they come in with a black eye, bruised face, And you know what's happened, and you talk to them about it, and it's like, no, this is what really happened. What really happened was that I, was out of pocket, and somebody texted me, and he checked my phone, or he told me to come back by midnight. I came back at 2. So it's this idea of like not wanting to connect with the fact that that person is abusing them. Denies the anger and exploiter to others and to self. Obviously, they believe that they have some control over the abuse, and like I said, if I didn't behave like this, maybe she kept a little money for herself. He found it. And, violence ensues. I shouldn't have kept that. Because it's supposed to go to him first, and then he gives it to me. That's the way it works. That's the way our partnership works. They believe that they control the situation. It lessens pimps, customer, traffickers' control and abuse. And again, that goes along with the last one that I stated, is thinking that you're in control of this experience. Man, I've been doing this for like 2 years. I know this is a trick. I go, I approach them, we, set the money, and that's it. And I am home safe. And I pull one of those, like maybe 10, 15 of those a night. I'm in control. Because again, what we know about trauma is that we want to be in control of our trauma. Because that gives us control over ourselves and our experiences. It makes us feel stronger and not weak. And if that person can say, I'm not a victim, I want to do this. This is what I want. This is what I'm wanting to do. I make so much money, you have no idea. And it's like, okay, well, what do you like about it? I like the money. Okay. Well, who doesn't like money? What don't you like about it? Is there anything that you don't like about it? I don't know. I mean, like, I don't like, there's some people that I have to sleep with that I don't really like. Okay, so tell me more about that. And really just trying to unpack that and that resistance to seeing the situation for what it really is. And there's a self-blame and abuse, and that goes along with the stuff that I was talking about. This is similar stuff. Seeks to keep exploiter happy to decrease violence and sees world from trafficker's perspective. This is a really interesting one. Every pimp is a victim. But his mama left him, and his daddy was out of the picture, and this is what happened, and he's so hurt, and you've no idea, and he's tried to get a job, and da-da-da-da-da, and they're just defending that abuser constantly, right? And not minimizing their experiences as victims. They experience their sense of self through pimps and traffickers' buyers' eyes. And so a lot of the times there's over-sexualization, hypersexualization that happens with a lot of youth and then women. Is they're very committed or even like very focused on like, who am I sexually? Who am I as a sexual object? Am I looking good? Am I being looked at? Am I being, somebody like trying to approach me? That is who they become. That's their one lens that they're being seen from. Or if not, they're being seen as hookers and not worth anything, and that's how they see themselves as well. And therefore continue to fall into this cycle. He's a good guy, he's a victim, he's thankful, the pimp or the trafficker customer has not killed them. And we talked a little bit about like, they will beat them to a bloody pulp. They will beat them to a bloody pulp. And then at the very end, they'll be like, you're lucky I don't just kick you in the face. You're lucky I don't just end you right now. And that moment is like, oh, like he doesn't want to kill me. He doesn't want to. He's got so mad, but he stopped himself. He could have, Lorena, he could have. He could have killed me, but he didn't. It's like, and these are the conversations that you have to have, and understanding that trauma bond is really what's going on. That Stockholm syndrome of years of exploitation and abuse is really what's really grounding these conversations and feeding into them. And so the reason why I share this with you, and why I feel like I want to end this with the presentation that we talked about, is because there is a lot of frustration from a lot of businesses, business owners, law enforcement, other service providers, families, treatment places that get very frustrated with this person not walking away. Come on. And they just get so frustrated, so annoyed. They're very impatient. And when somebody asks me, it's like, what if they come back and they come back to you, let them in? It's like, yeah, we do. But there are places that are like, I can't. Like, you're going to keep doing this again. You know, whether that's family or another service provider or a business person. I do a lot of outreach on Lake Street. We have to do a lot of outreach to business owners because business owners are like, I don't care who's who. Standing in the middle of my street, standing in front of my store, messing up business, all, drunk, high, da-da-da-da-da, fighting, this and that. I don't want that here. And we stop humanizing, and we start thinking, you are just getting in the way of what I'm trying to do. And that, I'd say to that, it makes sense. When I sit at those committees and I say, you know what, it makes sense. I'm not a business owner. I don't have that lens. But if I did, I'd probably see it that way too. Because I'm trying to take care of my family, and I'm trying to provide for myself and create something. And you are getting in the way of that. And I'm not a social worker, and I'm not a therapist, and I'm not a treatment counselor, so I don't have that lens and or really care. Because everybody's got stuff that they're dealing with. You're just another person. So these are a lot of the conversations that I have and I listen to. And I'm very empathetic to that because, again, I come from this lens. I don't expect you to leave here all being like, oh, I want to be a social worker. This is absolutely great. I want to work with victims. I'm not expecting that. You're going to walk out of here with the same lens you walked in as a business owner. Someone who wants to better themselves and take care of their family. That's totally fine. All I'm doing today is just giving you that information so you are educated to think, well, do I want to call him a prostitute? I remember that one training I went to with that girl was talking about language. Maybe this person isn't. Maybe this person is a sexually exploited person. How then what can I do to change that? Because I want to be able to change the interaction that I will have with them. So there is a lot of impatience and there is a lot of frustration. And I think the one thing that has really gotten me through my work is knowing that it really, really roots down to mental health. It really comes down to that mental health and that stability. And if someone has experienced horrendous events in their lives time and time again, by the time they reach me, they are not a healthy person. They're not making healthy decisions. They're not making decisions that I would make. I'd be like, oh, gross. Somebody approached me in the street, right? I'm like, because I know I'm a healthy person. I've been in healthy relationships. But when it's time and time again that you are in unhealthy relationships, unhealthy interactions with people, our decisions, our connections, that's all going to reflect that. And so it is frustrating. And I appreciate you sitting here and listening to that first part of the presentation that had nothing to do with rental properties. This part does, I promise you, coming up. But I appreciate that because it's essential to understanding how then can we proceed as part of that no wrong door model. How do you fit into that puzzle? And without knowing everything that we talked about and everything that I addressed, which I hope is something that sinks in, you might not be able to do this part. So I'm going to go ahead and move on to ask any questions. Anybody have any questions or wait to the end? I don't have time. Any questions, anybody? 509. Yes? Wait, give me a second. I really want to make sure everybody hears you. Susan, right? Thanks, Susan.
I'm thinking about how you connect with these people. We have in a church group kind of situation where people we know have reached out to people in this kind of prostitution and exploitation and so forth. And it's almost really a dangerous thing because of pimps don't want to give up their girls, their profits. And, okay, that's my one question. How does this happen that you're able to connect with them? Are you going to them and saying there's help available, or is it a communication between them that they say, I know about this, let's go figure out where this help is? And I actually have a second question too, totally beyond what I'm asking now, but I'm thinking health-wise. You haven't talked about that. I'm thinking of sexual diseases and things like that. Is that a big part of what you do in helping people?
Sure. So to answer your first question, and let me know if I'm getting this one because I was listening intently to the second one. How do they come to us? How do we engage with victim survivors? So it really depends on a lot of things. It depends on the age, depends on the system that they've come through. It depends on what initiatives we've got going forward. So for example, if I'm working with a youth, I usually will encounter a youth through another agency, potentially law enforcement or probation, or encounter another agency like a school or a counselor. And this happens because they've gotten training on it. right? This happens because someone came to their school or their account, whatever they're doing, and said, hey, this is what sexual exploitation looks like. This is what you want to watch out for. These are the signs. This is what can happen. This is what you do. And so then when they encounter that, and they might not be like, I don't for sure, but these are the things that I've seen. These are the telltale signs. And they are not always the same, but typically they're pretty clear. Maybe you can come talk to this youth, or maybe I can refer to your program, and that's one way. Another way is word of mouth. A lot of the older women that we work with know each other, right? They know each other from the streets. And so potentially like, hey, I'm gonna go to Pride tomorrow, you should, come with me. Oh yeah, I'm gonna go there and see Yvette, which is one of our facilitators, or Tracy. And so they just pass that word along. They're like, I'm done, I wanna get out of here. Why don't you hit up Charisma? I think they're open till like 5 or something like that. And so they tell each other these things. A lot of times it stings. And so we work with City of Minneapolis, attorney's office, and they let us know when they've picked somebody up on a prostitution charge. And then we go visit them in the jail, and we offer our services. So really, so many connections are made. It really just depends. We do outreach in the street as well, so we're actually approaching people and giving out bags. And I'm not saying, hey, I do this exactly, but I say, hey, if I can look at you and see that you need some help in some way, whether I know that you're being exploited or not, but it's like, here's a bag, there's the water, some cookies, this, and my card. This is where I'm from, this is what I do. You have a great day. I just want to tell you that. Bye. And then walk away. Sometimes you have conversations, sometimes they'll come back with us. A lady from last night, she was from the outreach. So that in that moment, I'm ready now. Okay, let's go. And so then, continue that process as to how to help her out. So it depends. And then sexually transmitted diseases, we are not medical providers. And so again, that goes back to who am I connected to? Agencies, NGOs that are all over the place say, okay, but I do know, for example, we work with Children's Hospital. And we are able to call them on their cell phone, the nurse, and say, I got somebody who's saying that they were raped during one of their dates. Can I bring her in? Yep, bring her in. Great, right? Or maybe like, I need to get tested. Okay, we'll go to Planned Parenthood, we'll go to this clinic. And so really it's not like we can't provide everything. We are not the all ever knowing agency, not by far. But we know, and we've created partnerships along the way where we can tap into those resources. Does that answer your questions?
Yeah, it answers. My impression is that it's so dangerous for them to
Sure.
maybe even come to your services because the pimp doesn't want this to happen, and bad things could happen. Do they come secretly in a lot of cases?
Some of them definitely come secretly. It depends if they have a trafficker. Some women or even youth don't have traffickers anymore, and they've learned what to do, and they just make money for themselves. And again, that's that cycle of then 10, 15 years, they're still doing the same thing with or without that third person, that third party. But it is dangerous. I've been in dangerous situations. I think a lot of the case managers and people that I've worked with have been in potentially, alarming red flag situations. And you're like, oh, you probably shouldn't have come here. But the work drives you. That motive and that need to help drives you. So yeah, it is potentially very dangerous. And we talk about that, and we do safety plans every time they come to our office and say, what do you need to be safe from? And then we go through a list, and we go through contact people and the resources, and when is this implemented, and I'm going to check back with you on 30 days to see how you did with the safety plan. Inform us if you have an abuser that might come to we don't advertise Pride, we're a family partnership, but if you got someone who's stalking you, or your partner is abusive, we need to have that conversation so we know as an agency how to keep ourselves safe. Any other questions? Okay, so I'm going to move on to the residential. What you've all been waiting for. So these are some recent studies. I talked a little bit about Polaris. And Polaris is a nonprofit agency who is primarily federally funded, and they work a lot with the federal government. They are the end-all be-all. They're actually amazing, and they have various different programs. They do a lot of research. They have a helpline. They also provide services in the human trafficking realm. So we talked about both labor trafficking and sex trafficking as well. And they have a program or department or something like that that's called Text the Be Free line. And so anyone that's experiencing some sort of exploitation can text that number and connect with them. So instead of calling, maybe some of them don't have phones, maybe, Not the same lifestyle as like, I'm gonna pick up my iPhone 7. If you don't have a house, you don't have a lot of means, you might not have that. Some do, but that's not the case with everybody. And so this particular organization decided to do a study that ranged from 2007 to 2016. So it's pretty extensive information and data. And it's the largest data set on human trafficking in the United States ever compiled and publicly analyzed. So what they did is that they studied 25 different types of human trafficking in the United States. And I'm not going to go into them, but there's various ones. We talked about stripping, we talked about brothels, we talked about indentured servitude, domestic labor, things like that. And so one of the things they did is that each of them had its own business model. So each of them had a very type of typical trafficker, maybe the ages, who they were, maybe male or female. They had recruitment strategies. They had victim profiles and methods of control that facilitate human trafficking. So a very specific model of operation. Same way if you'd say, okay, there's a bunch of burger chains. Each of them operate differently, right? They might post advertisements on their, they might focus on like chicken, and that's like their thing. And maybe I don't eat meat, so this is a really bad analogy, so I'm just, so then, some of them might be selling a different type of burger, or others may have a different type of sale, or maybe they wear like different uniforms that are a little more catchy than others. And so every single one has its different model to make money, right, to create this business. Similar to that, and that's what Polaris found, is that 25 different types of human trafficking all work very distinctly. What they found with commercial sex trafficking is that within the residential brothels run by the network coordinated traffickers, so brothels, people in homes typically, they're run by a group of people, a network of traffickers, not just one single pimp. And there is definitely the one single pimp with the one person that they exploit, typically a romantic relationship or presumed to be a romantic relationship. And then there's a pimp that has various people, a stable. That's what they call it. So they have 3 people, maybe they have one that they trust the most, a bottom. And that bottom controls all the other ones and gets privileges. Maybe it doesn't have to pull so many days. Maybe they just go out and recruit. Maybe they get to sit in the front seat. Maybe you get to sleep in the bed. Who knows? Maybe they have the kids. So this is the privileges that you get. And you better believe that the trafficked persons in that stable are being turned against each other for the most part, but still creating some level of family. Within private households used more informally for commercial sex. The advertisement varies, but often includes word of mouth, and Backpage.com as an emerging frequent source. And so a lot of times what we're seeing here is that Backpage is, and we talked a little bit about Backpage, is kind of this common denominator of how to access how to access people, how to access buying sex. And that is being seen on both of them. And so according to the mapping the market that I was telling you about, the study that I showed you, the commercial sex trade is an industry. It's very much of an industry. It's a business model. And because of that, it's going to have market forces, right? It's going to be subject to market forces. So where's the demand? So in some places, we talked about the 13 states that the FBI identified as being places, or 13 cities and FBI identifies being most prevalent for sex trafficking. You see that the demand is higher. The demand is higher for various different reasons. The demand is higher because there's more people. We talked about San Diego, where I'm from. Then in San Diego, there's way more tourism. So then that brings in a demand. Then we talked about in North Dakota. Then there's a demand because there's people that are working in those areas. And so what is that? The demand is what is going to set that price, right? And then the supply comes in, is that right? Yeah, and the supply comes in to meet that demand. And they're going to respond to those market forces to generate profit. And because they're going to respond to that, they're going to say, how can I make the most money? Okay, so if mathematically, and these pimps, traffickers, or they're thinking, oh man, how can I make the most money? I can go and rent a room at the Radisson for $300, maybe whatever dollars a night, right? And if I have a certain amount of girls, if I just have one person, I'm not going to call them girls, I need to catch myself, one person, then I'm not going to be making that much money because I can't there's not a lot of that work being put in, right? So I'm gonna need more people. Okay, so I'm gonna need like 4 or 5 people. So I'm gonna have them in this hotel. Okay, you can have 4 or 5 people in a hotel in the Radisson, I suppose. Then you have to think of the demand, the supplier that's going to come in and say, okay, it's going to see the back page and it's going to be like, oh, okay, this person looks hot, da-da-da, I'm going to call him, hello, da-da-da, or maybe text, where are you at, how much. That information is passed along, and that person goes to the Radisson, goes to that room. If they go to the Radisson, first of all, you're expecting that you're going to pay more money because you're in a more expensive place. And so it's that comfort of the buyer that they're looking for. They're not going to go to the Motel 6 if they just want to pay $60. They're not going to go to the Radisson. They're going to go to the Motel 6. And so they're going to say, okay, what am I paying for here? And if you have 4 or 6 people in a room, which can be done, you'll increase the profits that you make, but you're also not giving that buyer the experience, right? And that's what you want. You want frequent buying. You want someone that's going to be a frequent buyer. So with all those things in place, when big events, or even generally, what we're looking and we're finding now is that sometimes it's actually very expensive to rent a hotel room in a nice area so you can charge more. And we're training hotels. We're training hotel staff. I've been part of trainings and being like, what to look for, what to see. And I've talked to a lot of the people that are actually working the on-hands deck. I mean, like, I actually see a lot of this and behind this back door, and there's people that come in through the back, and there's sometimes a lot of activity doing this. And so now they're being more aware, and the traffickers know that. And so now they'll be like, all right, well, I don't want a bunch of people come in and being like, hello, as they greet you into the hotel. You're like, oh my God, I really don't want that type of event. I just want to come in and come out. So where can they get that? What's facilitated for that? An apartment, right? A place. Maybe it's their place, maybe it's their friend's place, maybe it's their mama's place, maybe it's their grandma, whatever it is. Somehow they manage that person to get some sort of lease, probably already with you. Or that person can come in and start a lease with you and having the proper documentation. If they don't have a criminal record here in Minnesota or an unlawful detainer, you can rent to them, right? So maybe they have a side job, or somehow they're able to get proof of income. Believe me, there are loopholes, and I know that there are laws and things in place that you've created. Despite the fact you talk to law enforcement, these things are happening. So however they're finding ways to nudge the way through, they're finding them. And so here they are, they're gonna pay how much is for rent in like not such a nice area, maybe like $1,000 a month, maybe $900 a month. And so in one night, with one person, with potentially, depending on the level of services, you might be able to make that within 6 customers, 7. If you want to charge low, 9. You already paid rent. That rent's paid all the other money, the profit, who's that going to? To the business, right? It's profit. So how am I making the most money? How am I increasing my profit? And that's what Dr. Lauren Martin talks about, is that it is an industry. And because of it, it's subject to market forces. And if anyone that's smart that has a business is going to think, how can I lower my cost? Am I going to buy the really expensive plastic forks? Or am I going to buy the cheaper plastic forks so I can make a little more money? Right? And if you're talking about like business or food or things like that, if I'm going to buy paper for an office, I'm going to buy the really expensive paper. I don't need to. I'm just going to buy the cheap paper. I make more money. So it is very much of an industry. And there are people as such, those who run that industry, that think of it like this. And they're constantly on the move, and they're constantly thinking ahead of all of us as to how they're going to cheat the system and how they're going to find themselves to make more and more money. So this next part, I want to go ahead. You also have on that packet, you have some stories. And I think, so I should say, start with how to identify it. So these there's 4 case studies, I believe. All of these, except for one, are actually cases from Minnesota, sex trafficking cases. I didn't put where they're from here. I just gave you some bullet points. And this is information that you can also find yourself. I don't have a specific, very fancy database that I found these on. I literally just did this work in the middle of the night looking up stories. So,
How to identify it. couples living in a wealthy suburb, has been charged with operating a brothel in several high-end apartments, according to prosecutors. Investigators said they were looking for additional victims of brothel ringleader Fadi Boulos Chaiban, 53 years old, and his partner, Tina Lorraine Saunders, 53, allegedly went online to recruit women for the prostitution ring, which ran from April 2015 to this past January, authorities said. According to prosecutors, Chaiban recruited women for his prostitution ring through online advertisements and arranged rendezvous with clients by occasionally posing as a woman. He took nude photos of some of the women and posted them online in advertisements for his brothel, authorities said. He also kept a detailed client list, officials said. During a stakeout of one of the Irving apartments, which Saunders rented, authorities witnessed men going in and coming out in 30 and 60-minute increments, prosecutors said. At the end of the day, Chaiban would arrive to collect cash from the victim and left only a fraction for her, authorities said. Chaiban and Saunders were arrested leaving their home on Tuesday. Chaiban had more than $469,000 in cash in a storage locker when he was arrested, officials said.
Thank you, Stella.
You're welcome.
So reading this right here, and again, these are just bullet points, is there anything that you can identify from this particular case study, this particular case, really not a case study, that you feel were red flags that maybe could have been caught earlier? Some indicators that you can see from either reading it or from what Stella said. Okay, so going in and out of the apartment, okay. 30 to 60-minute increments, prosecutor said. Okay, so that is something that kind of like poses a red flag. Someone going into the apartment all the time. Is that typically normal when you rent a rental property, that like there are different people walking into your apartment, right? It's either a drug deal or it's either something else that's going on, right? Trafficking that might be going on. And then you're also thinking about who is coming in and leaving. So is there a bunch of women that are coming in and leaving? Is it the same women? Is there 5 or 6 of them that just keep coming out, but you don't remember them necessarily being on the lease, and they're constantly doing it? Is that something that you want to maybe address? Sometimes you are not the eyes. Sometimes you have people that work for you, right? That do the maintenance or are kind of on the ground, that they might also benefit from knowing, okay, so there was this gentleman in the last presentation that said that he had noticed that after cleaning, that there was a key that had been like placed under a doorknob to the gate. And as I was cleaning, he found this like spare key. And he was like, well, I wonder what it is. So without saying anything, he left the key and started watching. And I think that they had cameras. And I started watching people coming in, strange people coming in, going over, picking up the key, opening the door, going in the room, 30, 60 minutes later, coming back out, closing the door, putting the key, and then leaving. Right? And this is happening at night. This is happening when some of those things are not being looked at. And it's someone going into the gate. You might not know what apartment you're going into. But so those things that we have to be a little more vigilant about. Is there anything else on here that anybody thinks that could be a potential red flag? No? Oh, yes. Thank you.
One couple or one person having multiple leases. I
Yes.
also kind of catch that if somebody
Yes.
owns a house and then they're
Yes.
renting also.
Thank you. Absolutely. And so there are people that just have plenty of money, right, that would have a lease. But then you also wonder, what is that for and why are they so scattered? What areas are they in? You are not the investigators, and this is not by any means that you have to go and investigate these cases on your own. But these are the things that you would take to your prospective police departments and say, I've just been watching some of this activity, and I've been noticing this. I would like for someone to come out and check it out, and they will. So you are that first point of contact. You, your employees, your staff are that first point of contact that can sit there and help us identify that, so then that case can be started, that police could be involved, the inspector is involved, advocates are involved, criminal justice is involved. All those things have to start somewhere, but we need your ripple in the water to begin that process. So I know we're kind of running out of time because I talked too much, so I apologize. So this is another one. The first one actually was in California, I believe, yes. Yes. And this one right here is the officers found 2 women inside the apartment who did not speak English. And the apartment had 2 bedrooms with mattresses on the floor and nightstands stocked with condoms and lubricant. So already you're knowing like, okay, so nobody lives here, right? So how many people do, I mean, obviously you can't do house checks or anything like that because it's not like a transitional living program. But is there any way for anyone to notice within that home that there's something like that going on? And you tell me, you're the experts right now. So is it possible that someone could say, hey, I was walking by, or I went in for, they reported a leak, or maybe they didn't report the leak, but the people above did, or the below did, because they're not going to report a leak. They'd rather just have a leak and not have anybody come in. But I had to come in, I had to go in, and it's kind of weird. They're just like mattresses on the floor. You know, so maybe you'll be like, well, they don't have the funds to buy beds. Okay, there's a bunch of lubricant on the stand and condoms. Well, maybe they'll, you know, so it's like you can sit here and play that game, or you can start thinking, well, that might be a little red flag, right? Several men were seen entering and leaving about 15 minutes later. So this, again, is that constant in and out. And then there was, so this particular case is actually over here in, I want to say, 2 women, I think it was St. Paul. And this particular person was driving them from, is this one? Yeah, driving them from California, because coordinate their destination. So we see a lot of that, a lot of trafficking victims coming from California to Minnesota, back and forth, stopping in Vegas, stopping in the Dakotas, and getting through. Again, using that pipeline to get through to make more money along the way. So a man who authorized to say prosecuted woman through trafficking back page sold for sex during the 2 weeks in the summer of 2015 while she stayed with Taylor's co-defendant and then girlfriend. For 3 days, the girl had sex with about 10 men a day, earning $150 each one. She told police the money was given to Moran, who was a trafficker, in exchange for letting her stay at the house according to the charges. Moran told her what to do according to the girl, and Taylor communicated via texting with men responding to Backpage ads. Again, Moran said she met Taylor last June after buying heroin from him. After several exchanges, he took her to his apartment and took pictures of her to post on the Backpage site. Trafficking began that day according to charges filed against Moran. So that's another thing we talked about, chemical dependency. So is that something that you're seeing? Again, you might not be the one seeing that. But if you pay close attention, you will see when people are intoxicated, especially if that person is out during the day, during the night, things like that, right? What are some of those signs? Some of those signs, one of those signs you definitely know is if a person is out and about all day and they're not sleeping at all. If they're maybe they're passing out, or they're out smoking, you know, things like that. They look drunk. They look like they don't have control of their motor skills. Those things are some things to watch out for. This one happened in Minnetonka, actually pretty recently. I think we've all might have heard about this. Potentially, it's a pretty big case. So prosecutors allege that Ricky Arlen Turner, 28, and Brittany Marie Haranza, 25, used a dating link on Backpage to advertise girls and women for prostitution. Evidence of the pair may have been operating in 14 states, according to electronic trail uncovered by subpoenas served on Backpage. Police detectives who led the investigation spent months obtaining search warrants and then combing through the internet, phone, travel, and business records. So they actually owned a home in Minnetonka. They actually owned a very expensive home in Minnetonka, right on the lake, I believe. And they were operating this business in and out of that home. A 28-year-old and a 25-year-old managed to have that lease signed by, or what I think they actually bought the house. So they used the proceeds from the dealings that they were doing to buy a house where they then solicited, and I don't know if they actually lived there at the home, the young girls, but they were actually minors. And there's one particular thing that I really got from this particular story is that the KSTP, actually who was just here, spoke with neighbors who lived near the location where the sting took place. They didn't notice anything suspicious in the neighborhood. In fact, one of them said, I didn't even know them, nothing. I knew the home had been sold a few years back. What does that say? And this applies to a home, but it applies for rental properties. It's like, who are also your eyes? Your neighbors, right? The other people, your other renters. The other renters that might be like, what is that noise, right? Or why is that girl always coming in and out of that house with no shoes? Why does she look so young, right? And all these things like, and educating everybody around you, increasing that awareness so they can say, okay, that just looks funny. And not be like, whatever, I don't want to get in the middle of anything, I just want to start, I just mind my own business. But educating them, because if you see something, then we have to do something. And if it's there for us, and we have to make sure that even if it's so weird, if it's that feeling in your stomach, you're like, that just doesn't seem right, then it's something. And then you let the investigators and the police officers figure that out. You don't have to go in there. You don't have to go knock on the door. You don't have to be like, hey, who's in there? Is everybody okay? You don't have to do any of those things. So there are, I'll go this one. So there's a really great quote from Grant Snyder, who is a police sergeant here in Minneapolis, the MPD, and he's absolutely amazing. He's doing this work for years and years and years. And he said something about watch efforts that they're gathering early this month. He said it's crucial to have somebody out there to see what happens. We need people who are watching. Thank you. Thank you.